When I found out it was like a sucker punch to the gut.
Pain hits home. A pastor and his parish mourn the loss of 2 American women killed in the French Alps plane crash. Questions revived. Why did the White House swap 5 prisoners for an accused American deserter? Joy and hope. Pope Francis says these are traits that should be found in all believers. And more than an image, a rare chance to see what is believed to be the burial cloth from the empty tomb of Jesus. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, March 26th, 2015. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. This was no accident. It was deliberate. That chilling conclusion from the French prosecutor investigating the Germanwings plane crash. The Airbus A320 crashed in the rugged French Alps Tuesday, killing all 150 people on board. As the grim search for remains continues in the French Alps, the cockpit voice recording suggests the co-pilot deliberately crashed the plane.
The most plausible likely interpretation, in our view, is that the co-pilot, through deliberate abstention, refused to open the cabin door.
On the recording, the pilot is heard leaving the cabin, turning controls over to the co-pilot. The co-pilot, Andreas Lubitz, sets the controls to descend. When the pilot returns, the cabin door is locked, and Lubitz does not respond to his frantic calls. Airline officials express their shock.
Even in our worst nightmare, we would not have been able to imagine that such a tragedy could occur in our business.
German officials say they have no reason to believe 28-year-old Lubitz had any ties to terrorism. He's been working for Germanwings since 2013 and had 630 hours of flight time. People who knew him say he appreciated his job. Officials say passengers likely didn't realize the danger until the last minute, when screams were heard on the cockpit recorder. The French prosecutor calls the co-pilot's action mass murder. And we are learning more tonight about those who perished. Our Jason Calvi joins us now with continuing coverage.
Ryan, aboard people from 18 countries, including Germany, Spain, and the United States. 3 Americans died in the crash. Today, the home parish community of 2 of those victims mourns their loss.
It's a tragedy for the parish. We lost 2 members of our community.
Emily Zelke and her mother Yvonne were aboard the plane that crashed in the French Alps on Tuesday. Parishioners of Sacred Heart Parish in Manassas, Virginia, remember them.
Yvonne was active in our faith formation program, working with children in their prayers and making sure that the children developed a prayer life. So in many ways, a lot of what we do, our children are diminished because they no longer have her to help. Emily grew up, she loved music. She grew up singing in our children's choir.
Emily's friends are grieving.
She literally was the light in the room.
The pain is felt across the ocean in Germany, where a moment of silence is observed. 16 high schoolers and 2 teachers here died in the crash. In Spain, these Catholic school students are now without their 12-year-old schoolmate Emma. Her mother and grandmother perished with her. Today, some of the victims' loved ones visited an area near the crash site in the French Alps. People in the region are offering an open door, serving as interpreters for the families. Today they're thinking of the victims and the countries they came from. Back in Virginia, Father Mike Bazan is asking for prayers for Emily and Yvonne Selke and their family.
They were always positive, always smiling, always happy, joyful. It was a joyful family. We can't succumb to the darkness.
Father says the funerals still aren't scheduled. The State Department announced today the 3rd American victim, his name Robert Oliver. They didn't provide any personal details. Brian?
Jason Calvi, thank you. Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The White House is now added to the Pope's list of stops when he visits the U.S. in September. President Barack Obama will host the Holy Father September 23rd. They'll continue their conversation from this meeting in Rome last year. They're likely to discuss the poor, the environment, immigration, religious freedom, and protecting religious minorities. Pope Francis will also address a joint session of Congress and the UN General Assembly. He will then attend the World Meeting of Families in Philadelphia before returning to the Vatican. Of course, EWTN brings you every step of this historic papal visit. Well, now that Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl is charged with deserting, controversy surrounding the prisoner swap for his release is revived. Chief White House correspondent Susanne LaFrankie is following that story.
Brian, the controversy surrounds the president's swap for Bergdahl for 5 Taliban terrorists who were released from Guantanamo Bay. One is reportedly back on the battlefield. Critics say this is a huge embarrassment for the Obama administration.
Sergeant Bergdahl is charged under the Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl awaits a possible court-martial unconfined at the U.S. Army North Headquarters in San Antonio, Texas. Bergdahl, a prisoner of war captured by the Taliban in 2009 and now charged by the Army with desertion and misbehavior before the enemy, accused of, quote, shamefully abandoning his unit. Speaker of the House John Boehner remains critical of President Obama's polarizing prisoner swap 10 months ago.
The more troubling part of this is the fact that we transferred 5 prisoners from Gitmo in this trade. And there's news reports that one of them is already back on the battlefield.
Meanwhile, Bergdahl, for the first time, publicly describing his brutal 5 years in captivity. In a statement, he says he was chained to a bed, spread eagle, and blindfolded. Later chained inside a cage. One guard tried to rip his beard and hair out and claims he was beaten with a copper cable. The sergeant also says he tried to escape 12 times. Still in question, though, why he disappeared from his post in the summer of 2009. Some from his unit saying he was a deserter and a traitor. Sandra Andrews says her son Darren, as well as several other soldiers, died while searching for Bergdahl. Bergdahl's attorney says there is no evidence any soldier died looking for the sergeant and is surprised by the charges. President Obama invited Bergdahl's parents to the White House to celebrate their son's release, and that was last May. He hosted them in the Rose Garden. And he also said that they supported the release, and it was a very public display. They hugged, and the president said that they were welcoming Bowe back to the United States, and it was a very public display. We are also told that Bergdahl faces up to life in prison if convicted, a dishonorable discharge, and he could lose $200,000 in back pay. Brian.
Susanne LaFrankie at the White House, thank you. Warplanes from the U.S.-led coalition strike ISIS targets in the Iraqi city of Tikrit, which is now in the hands of the militants. The coalition says airstrikes began Wednesday at the request of Iraq's prime minister. Analysts say if Iraqi forces can retake Tikrit, they'll have a better chance of recapturing Mosul, a much larger city. Saudi Arabia launches airstrikes against Shiite rebels in Yemen. More than 100 Saudi fighters are bombing key military installations near the capital. Those strikes began before dawn, flattening buildings near the airport. At least 18 people were killed. Egyptian military officials say Egypt and Saudi Arabia planned a ground operation next. U.S. allies in the region say they are trying to protect the country from the rebels who they call a tool of Iran. Iran is denouncing the bombings. In an unusual display of bipartisan unity, the House today approves a $214 billion measure. It permanently blocks cuts in physicians' Medicare payments. The bill's Senate fate is unclear, but it is improving. Some Democrats in the Senate are softening their objections to abortion curbs and other provisions in the measure. 2 suspects are arrested in the gang rape of an elderly nun in India. This security camera video shows 3 of the suspects. Police say the victim tried to stop a group of men from ransacking the convent. This week, protesters held an interfaith prayer service in support of the nun.
Being a Christian, it's like my sole responsibility, and even from the soul I believe I should be here and I should support the sister. Being from a woman community, I think this kind of events are taking continuously and very frequently they are taking place, and I think the government should now seriously take some steps for the protection of the woman.
The nun, who was in serious condition, has since been released from the hospital. She has recovered. New anti-rape laws in India, introduced 2 years ago, doubled prison terms for rapists to 20 years. The Vatican announces Pope Francis will visit Turin this summer, home to what's believed to be the burial shroud of Jesus. The Holy Father's visit coincides with a rare exposition of the Shroud of Turin. It will be on display to the public from mid-April to late July. The cloth relic, stained with a bloody image of a crucified man, front and back, is believed to be the burial shroud of Jesus. Father Damian Weber is Superior General of the Maryknoll Missionaries. He is joining us from Rome. Father, can you give us a very brief teaching on the Shroud of Turin?
Well, the Shroud of Turin is over centuries. I would call it almost an additional gospel, because it shows us in reality what we can read in the Gospels about the suffering and the death of Jesus Christ. And there we can actually see it. It's like a reality show of light and blood, showing in reality what really happened. And as much as people might say this is a construct, science have proved up till now that it is true, and that what we see is really the suffering and the eventual giving of himself of Jesus Christ as our Savior.
So this shroud has deep meaning for the Church, does it not?
I must say that the Shroud of Turin proves that Jesus Christ has died beyond any doubt, but there is a second proof, a second shroud, that so-called Veronica, the Sudarion, which was over the face of Jesus, that proves that he is alive, that he died. In the Gospel of St. Matthew, of St. John, in the 20th chapter, we read there how Magdalene came from the grave and found the tomb open, and she ran to tell the disciples, and Peter and John ran, and John made the point that he ran faster, but he allowed Peter to go in first, who saw the linen rolled up and the faith that was laid over his head on a separate place. And then it says, John went in, he saw and believed. He could not have believed the linen that was rolled up and said nothing, but he saw that face in the other shroud, a living faith of the risen one, with the same wounds of the suffering one, with the same contours, with the same blood spots, but he was alive. And this is what we need today, to know that he died and that he is alive.
And we see and we believe. Father Damian Weber, thank you so much for that beautiful commentary on the Shroud of Turin. We appreciate you joining us from Rome.
Happy Easter to you all.
Coming up, the Supreme Court gives a former UPS driver another chance to prove her claim of discrimination based on pregnancy. And Pope Francis encourages all of us to wear his signature smile, saying joy is a Christian trait. The laity are called to become a leaven of Christian living within society. The latest from the official Twitter feed of Pope Francis. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening, March 26th. I'm Brian Patrick with the EWTN News Nightly team. Well, it is being called a win for pro-lifers. The Supreme Court today sides with a former UPS driver in a pregnancy discrimination case. Peggy Young worked for the delivery company in 2006. When she became pregnant, she was denied lighter duties and had to take unpaid leave. The justices ruled today 6-3 that UPS broke the Pregnancy Discrimination Act. Lower courts must now re-examine Young's case with a more accepting view of the discrimination claim. UPS has since changed its policy and says it will try to accommodate pregnant workers. Dr. Charmaine Yoest is president of Americans United for Life. How do you expect this ruling to influence the treatment of pregnant women by companies moving forward?
Well, let me tell you why we got involved, is we think it was very important to firmly establish in the law that a pregnant woman should be treated equally in the workplace as someone else who, as they say, is similarly situated. So if someone else has a temporary disability and their employer accommodates them, then they need to do the same thing for a pregnant woman. Because our concern is that we make sure that there isn't a hostile environment toward pregnancy in our culture at large. So it's not that you have to give a woman who's pregnant special treatment as a business person, but if you're going to treat one worker who has a disability in one way, then you have to do that for a pregnant woman as well.
Now, this was not a clear-cut decision. I'd like to look at Antonin Scalia, Justice Scalia. He sided with UPS in this case, and he said the law does not prohibit denying pregnant women accommodations or any other benefit for that matter on the basis of an even-handed policy. So how should corporations balance between good business and accommodating pregnant workers?
Well, this is the thing, is Peggy Young still has to go back to the lower court and prove her claim. And there are some complicated technicalities involved in this particular case. But I think you have to come at this with common sense and say fair is fair, and set policies that say you're going to treat everyone in the workplace the same, that who has some sort of temporary problem or temporary challenge. And that's really all that we were advocating for in this case.
Several groups came together with very differing ideas on many things, but they found some common ground here, didn't they?
They did, and people were amused. It's not very often that we're siding with NOW and NARAL and some of the other pro-abortion organizations, but it is interesting to see that you can come together when it comes to pregnancy, and we're almost hoping that it's a little window for those groups to see that unborn human life is worth protecting.
How is this a pro-life issue?
It's a pro-life issue because we need to value motherhood and to say that a pregnant woman should be treated with respect and dignity, just like any other human being.
So are you pleased with the outcome of this case so far?
We are so far.
Okay. Dr. Charmaine Yoest, President of Americans United for Life, thank you so much for joining us and giving your side of this very interesting development.
Thank you, Brian.
All right. Tulsa, Oklahoma gets slammed with what appears to be a tornado, leaving one dead and massive damage behind. A state of emergency is declared in 25 counties across the Sooner State. Cleanup is underway in this mangled mobile home park near Tulsa. Now, across the U.S., fewer tornadoes than normal have been reported this season so far, but one Oklahoma mayor warns people to stay alert.
It's springtime in Oklahoma, so you just have to be prepared, and we would tell people continue to be prepared because you never know what's coming next.
The storms knocked out power to thousands across the region. Pope Francis today led an hour of prayer for peace before morning mass at the Casa Santa Marta, where he lives. It's part of the celebrations marking 500 years since the birth of St. Teresa of Avila, or St. Teresa of Jesus. In his homily, Francis says joy and hope are Christian traits. He says, quote, "It is sad to find a believer who knows no joy, fearful in his attachment to cold doctrine." Up next, badly burned in a gas explosion, this Honduran girl finds hope at a Boston Shriners hospital. And Pope Francis tells 150 homeless people to feel at home in the Vatican's iconic Sistine Chapel. A Thursday thought from Mother Angelica, foundress of EWTN. Only He knows the degree of glory He desires for us and what graces and sufferings are needed to arrive at that sublime destiny. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening. I'm Brian Patrick. A woman raised by a gay parent speaks out in defense of marriage between a man and a woman. Katie Faust was raised by a mother with same-sex attraction. A post she wrote against the redefinition of marriage for online journal Public Discourse has gone viral. So in the article she writes, "We all deserve equal protection and opportunity in academia, housing, employment, and medical care because we are all humans created in the image of God." And Katie continues, "However, when it comes to procreation and child rearing, same-sex couples and opposite-sex couples are wholly unequal and should be treated differently for the sake of children." Katie is with us tonight. We're glad to have you. Why do you think your article has gotten so much attention?
What happened in that article is I stated what I am for. And so often in this discussion, people frame it in terms of what they are against, especially our side of the debate. But truthfully, this is an argument, this is an issue that has to do with children's rights. And I am for children having a relationship with both their mother and father. Children have a natural right to a relationship with their mother and father. Redefining marriage redefines parenthood. And the state has an interest in marriage because it has an interest in children. Now, marriage is much more than children, but the state's interest is solely children when it comes to the reasons behind why we promote this relationship above all others.
And marriage as created by God is deeply rooted in procreation of children. Pope Francis has been very vocal about this, that children deserve a mother and a father. Having grown up in a family that did not experience that, what do you see as the real dangers of trying to redefine marriage to include same-sex couples?
Mainly, it's that a child cannot arrive in a same-sex headed household without suffering loss. They are going to be denied either a full or a partial relationship with one parent that matters deeply to them. We will be promoting and institutionalizing a relationship that necessitates loss for children. Not just loss with a biological parent, but loss of that critical dual gender influence that all kids crave. So it really is an issue of we can permit people to form consensual adult relationships that they choose, but marriage is about promoting a relationship. The reason we promote that relationship is because it is the relationship that protects the rights and well-being of children.
Now, as a married parent, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the unique roles of a mother and father in the family and why you personally know how important that is.
Yeah, gender is a real phenomenon. Regardless of how many people want to talk about the fluidity of gender, the truth is that men and women are different, beautifully different, wonderfully different, in a complementary way. And you really can't make that argument that men and women really don't bring anything beneficial or unique to the table when you're talking about child rearing. I mean, it would be silly to make that case when you're talking about the Supreme Court to say that women don't bring a unique perspective. I mean, if gender makes no difference, then why won't we see President Obama surrounded by female social security agents? And to say that gender makes no difference in the theater of child rearing is crazy talk. Men tend to encourage risk-taking and competitiveness. They are more focused on abstract standards of right and wrong. Women tend to focus more on caregiving and nurturing and the mundane tasks of everyday rearing of the children. And both are critical, and children need both.
Well, keep speaking out because it's making a difference. Katie Faust, thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Well, a 9-year-old girl severely burned in a gas explosion in Honduras faces a long road of recovery. As our Catherine Zeltner reports, she's getting the best possible burn care at no cost to her family.
A trip to the market forever changed Paola Matuti Porter's life. She and her family were in a crowded marketplace in Honduras last month when a gas cylinder exploded during lunchtime. Her mother recalls the 9-year-olds running to her, screaming for help.
I managed to take off her clothes quickly, as best I could, because the skin on her arm was coming off. Her face was already melted.
The blast killed one child and wounded more than 70 people, including Paola and her family. On the way to the hospital, her mother prayed that Paola, the most seriously injured in her family, would hold on long enough to survive. Thanks to the work of local and international charities, several young survivors, including Paola, were flown to Shriners Hospital in Boston, which specializes in pediatric burn wounds. Paola had burns over 40% of her body.
This skin grafting is actually life-saving for her because as long as she had burn wounds on her body that were not covered with her own skin, she would be at grave risk of having an infection that could lead to overwhelming bacterial infection that could lead to death.
Paola has already had 2 major operations and will need physical therapy before returning to Honduras. Her mother says she's often in intense pain, but grateful for the world-class care.
I told her she is alive thanks to God. He loves her. That's why he will help her recover.
Hope for the long road ahead. Catherine Zeltner, EWTN News Nightly.
Thank you, Catherine. And Pope Francis greets 150 homeless people in the Sistine Chapel, invited there for a tour followed by a meal. The Holy Father told them the Sistine Chapel is their home and its doors are open to all. He blessed them, asking them to pray for him. He wanted no pictures taken of the meeting with his homeless friends, but we leave you tonight with your own virtual tour of this beautiful cradle of the arts in the heart of the Vatican. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.